So there was a point in your life where you didn't, because of your upbringing, the ways that you were socialized, you didn't necessarily know how to name and recognize racism in ways. And so, what are some experiences that you had that took you from that place to then now you're able to recognize racism? You're able to, some ways, honor and trust your own, gut when you know what's happening within you. What took you from not being able to recognize it to now you can recognize it, and then later on you're sharing it and translating these lessons to your own kids?
Yeah. I A lot of these things happened all at the same time. I would say my late 20s, early 30s were really this a period of tremendous change and growth. When I was 30, I reconnected with the only Korean adoptee friend I'd ever had in childhood. We had met at a church camp when we were in like first or second or grade or something. And I was just starting to again think, oh, I've got kids and they're half Korean, and how am I going to help them not be scared of Korean culture the way I was.
Mm.
And so I was starting to learn how to cook Korean food. And so that meant going to like Korean grocery stores or Asian markets. And I just happened to come across this publication called Korean Quarterly, and I brought it home and I opened it up, and there was this essay by this person who there were enough clues in her essay that I was like, I think that might be the person that I'd met.
Oh.
And she had an email there, and she had started doing some organizing in kind of central Minnesota, which is pretty rural, and other Korean adoptees. She was going through the same thing. And I was like, oh, she's also really reckoning with this identity stuff too. And she also had young kids about the same age as me. So we reconnected, and she had just decided she was going to go to Korea, and she invited me to go along with her. And so we went. And so it was like meeting other Korean adoptees and going to Korea for the first time. In my mind, I don't think I ever thought that I would get a chance to go to Korea and see the place where I was born. And
Mhm.
so that was really significant. But both of these things, when I came home from Korea, it was just this huge identity crisis for me. And a couple of years later, I was a college dropout. That's the other thing I didn't talk about. But I had gone to college, and I talked about how that was the time when I had the freedom to explore my racial identity. But I was a really not great student. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I kept transferring schools and dropping out. And so I had just decided I'm taking a break. But something really, I was doing some volunteer work, and those folks that I was working with in the volunteer program suggested social work as a potential pathway for me. And I was 32, 33-ish. And they said, you should look it up. So I found a program, and it was that BSW program
Mhm.
at this small college. It was a public university, and it was a small program where every single faculty in that program were people of color. And wow, like I started that
Yeah.
program,
Wow.
and that's where I learned all this language. But I will say it's a unique program because when I tell people, oh, yeah, my instructors were Latino women, Latino men, African American, Hmong, and Native American, they're just like, what social work program were
Yeah.
you in?
I'm saying that a little bit.
No, it was unique. I don't think I even understood the gravity of how unique and special that was. And they had intentionally set up their program so that the first year we were all in community organizations. So I was an African American adoption agency, and people were at like an Asian American place or Division of Indian Works or working with the Latino population. And the first internship, for folks who don't know social work, you do an internship, but usually it's like in your undergrad, you do one for a year.
Mhm.
We had two of them. And the first year we're in these community organizations where it wasn't just the clients that were from that racial or ethnic group. It was also all the caseworkers and the administrators. So we got a really different view, a vantage of what social services could look like. And
Wow.
then our second internship was in a quote unquote traditional agency. And so what we saw really quickly was like the difference between how people of color run their organizations and their services versus white dominated agencies. And I learned so much in that program, and that's where I thrived for the first time ever.
Mm.
I got good grades. I was really engaged in the coursework and loved my internship experiences and was encouraged by my faculty. They saw something in me and said, "You should go on to get your master's." And again, coming from somebody who my parents hadn't gone to college, I had a very I don't know exactly the right word to say it. I just felt like I was wandering and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so my college pathway was not effective. I see a lot of people, like a lot of my students have the same experiences. They don't know what they want to do, but they feel like they're supposed to go to college. So they go and
Yeah.
then they struggle. Once I figured out social work was the right pathway for me, and I was so influenced by having faculty of color and like having an Asian instructor, having a Native American, it's like it was really mind blowing. I went on to my master's program and kind of similar experiences in my internships. I went to the flagship program at the land grant university, and there were two faculty of color in the whole program. It was a huge program. And so again, it was
Yeah.
like
Seeing that contrast.
seeing the contrast. And I think my activism kind of really started around that time. So I started a student of color social work organization. Do you remember the film Crash
I do.
that
I
won
do.
the Academy
I
Award?
sure do. Yep.
So I
I
had
sure
seen the
do.
film and I hated it, and I had all kinds of critiques about it. And my
Mhm.
social work student organization in my MSW program, they wanted to have the film shown and have a discussion about it. And I wanted to have a discussion about it, but not that discussion that I thought was going to happen
Yeah.
in this space with the white students.
Yeah.
So I actually appealed to a graduate student, a PhD student who was Black, and the dean, and said, "Would you help me? Could we watch this film, but have it only students of color watch the film?" And that kind of started the Student of Color organization. So I was
Yeah.
starting at that point to put everything together. I started my blog around the same time.
Wow,
And so
okay,
you
so
could really see
this is
how,
good history that we're getting. Okay, yeah.
yeah. So this is around 2006. And I
Okay.
think I felt like I could now translate all the things I'd learned in my bachelor's of social work program at this really amazing school that I went to and start using it because I was like, I didn't know any of this stuff. This is where I learned about Native American boarding schools and
Right.
orphan trains and
Yes.
the Multi Ethnic Placement Act, all these things that really harmed children of color. And that's where I were able to connect the dots to my own personal experience to these larger projects and systems
Mhm.
and be like, oh, the United States has a long-standing history of trying to separate kids that they think are from problematic communities, whether it's immigrant communities or whatever, and trying to either assimilate us, as one way of um, removing us from that identity. Because it's powerful when you raise children to hate their own communities,
Ye
and people oftentimes are like, adoption is like it's not trying to do that, but I think actually it is. The Indian Adoption Project was uh, Children's Bureau and Bureau of Indian Affairs project that intentionally was trying to remove children, place them in white adoptive homes, Native children, because they wanted them to be assimilated. And
Mhm.
there's all these. So I feel like when you destroy families of color, you destroy their communities. And I do think that's an intentional act.
Yeah.
And without it in adoption, it makes it harder to critique, but it doesn't mean that the intention's not still there.
That's right. The intention and the design. When you mentioned Crash, it just took me way back because, yeah, it was one of those things that even when I was in grad school, it was something that I was shown. And there's going to be another episode that comes out with a classmate of mine from that time. And we're just reflecting on some things that were happening and the need to have conversations structured in a way like how you described it, because you already know what kind of conversation that was going to be about. And we know the impact that was going to have if we didn't do some kind of caucusing with that discussion.
Hmm.
So I appreciate you sharing that story. So you've had those earlier experiences and didn't know how to recognize racism at one time. got into your social work program. Speaking of design, that contrast, starting out your field placement and the differences in organizations and seeing how what impact did even that shift or the things that you were noticing, what impact did that have on you? And then how are you carrying those earlier experiences into the work that you do now? As you shared that, I'm like, this is the thing. Like, you're right. Most folks they'll just do the one, but I loved how you described that. You had a chance to experience multiple settings and see the differences and how they play out.
Greatest lesson that I learned from being in my BSW program was that people of color are competent leaders in finding and directing healing for our own communities. And that's a lesson that the history of social work doesn't teach us.
Mhm.
The history of social work is white, very well educated, and wealthy people are the ones who help save and rescue us, people of color. And my experiences in my undergrad social work program was like, nope, that's not true. We can take care of ourselves. And in fact, we know best what our communities need.
Mhm.
And so I think that allowed me to develop a critical voice and the ability to be able to push back a little bit when other people want to portray this dominant view of, oh, we just need rescuing and saving. We don't know what we're doing. All the pathological things you hear in politics today about communities of color
Yeah.
come from these really deficit frameworks. Instead of people saying, wow, despite all the hundreds of years of attempted genocide and erasure, we're still here
Still here.
and we are still taking care of our folks. And that's really profound. And I think that a lot of people don't really recognize that. It's what really drives me today in my work is being like, no, man, like I like films, okay? So the film A Bug's Life,
Yeah.
there's a scene where the ants and the grasshoppers are saying, "We can't let them know that there's more of them than there are us." Like,
Yes.
they don't want us to know our own power. And so I'm all about trying to help people understand, like, you have power, but it's not individual power, which is like what supremacy wants us to believe. It's power in our communities. It's power through communities.
Mhm.
And so I'm trying to help, in my case, it's transracial adoptees understand if we can join together and work together, then we can make some great changes. But if we think that we're just going to be individual leaders, then we're just buying into the white supremacy model. One of the things I've been saying lately in my communities, talking to adoption agencies and child welfare organizations, is that the systems that harmed us as people of color, as transracially adopted kids in the foster care system who are largely youth of color, those systems that harm us can't be the systems that heal us. That
Mm.
those of us who experience these different things, when we put together programs and services, we do a better job of meeting the needs of our communities. And so, what I am now starting to ask organizations is instead of you developing your own post adoption services for adopt, why not just fund those of us that are already doing that work and then we'll do it?
Yeah.
Like they got
Yeah.
the money, so they can fund us, because we're doing a good job. We just don't have enough funding. We don't have enough respect. It's like the agencies want to do it. If they really believe and say they're committed to valuing our experiences, then they can value us by helping to support us financially, which
That's
is
right.
one of the most biggest challenges, that we have in doing our community work.
It reminds me of things I often hear, like folks of color are over mentored, but underfunded though. Like you said, we
Oh,
know
yeah.
what we need. We're already doing a good job. What we need is actually the resources, right? And
Right.
there's all this history and policy and reasons why we don't have the resources that we need. But we know, given the right resources, we know exactly what we would do. We know how we would go about solving the problems that we're facing.
Yeah, I mean, don't you think I've noticed, at least in the child welfare sphere, there's been this real push for a while to have people with quote unquote lived experience join advisory boards or be on the board of directors in a kind of limited token role, or we'll start a program and we'll hire somebody with lived experience to be part of it. But it's always like an add on to their main programming. Again, I feel like it's going to be so limited. Why not just say, yeah, that's not my business, so to speak.
Yeah.
Let's hand it off to the people who really can do it.
Imagine what this world, what our institutions, what our systems would look like. Yes, yes. Just
Yeah.
owning, no, we actually don't have the solutions to this, but we know who does. You all do. And so here you go. Here you go. Here you go.
And it's a challenge for funders too, because I want those different organizations that do funding for different social service organizations to be more thoughtful and think more creatively about the projects that they're going to fund and how they're going to support people. So, like, we might need some extra support in training on how to manage big budgets and do that sort of thing, but then let us do that.
Yeah,
Right. So don't just say, I'll hire you to be a program director, but we're going to control the resources. We need to learn how to do it.
that's right.
And it's the long game too. These projects are often funded for 3 years and then they want you to figure out how to sustain your program.
Hmm.
We're not getting help in figuring out how to be sustained for more than the 3-year project demonstration
Right. That's
funding that
right.
we're getting.
That's right. And if you're leading with that kind of a time frame, how can you project? How can you be visionary? How can you take that time to actually map things out when that is such a short time frame? It's like you're pretty much just handling some folks, everybody navigates is different, but I think the impact of that short time frame is like you're pretty much just handling things as they come, what's in front of you in
Mhm.
some ways. And yeah, that funding is very important in terms of providing even more than that. Folks need staff, folks need there's a variety of different resources, and that's a really short
Right.
window. Mhm.
Yeah.